Hey everybody, Terrible Dactyl here. I wanted to do something a little different today because I just had this idea. I had a couple of thoughts. Maybe this is sort of a reaction video because I had a couple thoughts related to a video that I just watched by Spector Creative, a great channel. If you haven't watched that channel before, Spector goes into a lot of detail on the toy industry as an insider in the toy industry. Talking about, how products are marketed and how different kinds of toys are made. Very, very interesting to peruse that channel. One of his newest videos is about toy tools, and I'll put the link to this video in the description here, and if I can get this to show a little card, it should be popping up right about now. When I talk about toy tools, obviously we're talking about, in the dinosaur collecting community, what's commonly just referred to as a mold. The injection mold, the big, heavy, metal injection mold that is where the sculpt is transferred into there and into which plastic is injected into the mold, cooled off to produce a blank figure that is then sent to be painted at a different part of the factory. I've talked before about how these molds or the tooling for these figures is often the #1 most expensive part of producing a figure. It's really expensive to create these huge metal molds. They take a lot of technique just to transfer the sculpt into them and to modify them. So toy companies need to get their money's worth from a mold. They're going to want to keep that mold in production for as long as possible. But what Spector talks about on his video is just the ways in which these molds can eventually wear out. And what happens to them? What is the life cycle of a toy mold or action figure mold? What is it like? Obviously, for me, as somebody whose focus collection is the old Safari Carnegie line, and somebody who's made a whole website trying to document and track these little changes in both paint applications and differences in the mold, it got me thinking about how this applies to things like the Carnegie Collection and other dinosaur toy lines too. Dinosaur toys are obviously less complicated than action figures. There's a lot fewer parts. Most of them are just a single part, maybe with 1 or 2 little articulated pieces that have to be assembled later. So the molds are much simpler, which probably, I'm guessing, makes them a little cheaper to begin with because you're really just molding one piece. But the technique is similar. A lot of dinosaur toys, especially back in the old days, were using softer material like, PVC, not like ABS kind of plastic, which is harder. So maybe the mold doesn't wear out as fast. But the thing that really interested me to learn from the Spector Creative video about toy tools is the fact that the life cycle of these molds can be anywhere between 1 and 5 years. So immediately I started just doing a little quick addition in my head to think about the Carnegie Collection, because I have all these facts about different Carnegie molds and the different mold groups. You can read all about this on my website, carnegiecollection.blogspot.com, and take a look at my previous videos, a few of which I've talked about this. But there have been a few main points within the line where, especially the original Carnegie figures, many of which were in production for the entire line from 1988 to 2015, did get new tooling. Obviously, the originals came out in 1988, so I started thinking, okay, 1988, 5 years, that would be 1992 or thereabouts. That's right about when the refreshed molds were released. 1991 or 1992 is when you start to see those secondary molds that have like the deeper grooves, the sculpting is not as nice. They seem like they're probably retooled rather than remolded, meaning they didn't create an all-new mold. Somebody went in there with like basically a drill and just sharpened out the details. So I went back and I looked at my collection, and yeah, you can kind of see that the later editions of the Carnegie figures, the early Carnegie figures had really subtle details sculpted into them. Sometimes it's covered up a little bit by the paint application. They were getting a little muddied, a little washed out by the early 90s editions, or at least what I think are probably the ones that came out in the early 90s. And that's right about the time when these refreshed molds took over, which to me look a lot clunkier, a lot chunkier, not really as as nice and sculptured and artistic as the old ones, probably because they were retooled. I think at that point, probably my theory would be that Safari didn't want to spend the money to completely retool these figures. To create new tooling for them, what they did was they retooled them, meaning they went in there and modified the existing tooling as kind of a stopgap measure. So let's leap ahead from 1992. Let's see, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96. Oh, what happened in 1996 with the Carnegie Collection? Could it be the full line refresh where everything got brand new tooling? Or at least it looks to me like brand new tooling. I don't think these are modified molds anymore. A lot of them are pretty significantly different. There you go. That 5-year period strikes again. So every 5 years you're getting a refresh, either retooled or all new tools added for the classic Carnegie figures. Another interesting thing that came up in the Spector Creative video is the double tooling. Spector mentioned that for a big release of something that the company anticipates is going to need a big production run, like extra product being shipped out to meet demand or what has been ordered by retailers, they will actually just right up front create 2 molds for that figure. Like if there's a big movie release or something and you got to get, a lot of Captain America figures out there or something, you might tool up 2 of those, even though it's double the expense. You need that to meet those orders, meet the quotas of the sheer amount of sales that they are anticipating. This is exactly what we see in the Carnegie Collection. The Carnegie Collection must have been pretty hot in the mid-90s, because in that 1996 refresh, this is all documented on my site if you go look at the different molds. 1996 and 1997, Safari created for most of the classic figures, especially like the popular ones, 2 sets of tools. The molds are similar, but there are distinct differences between them. So they were obviously anticipating that these classic dinosaurs were popular enough, or that they were receiving orders from retailers, of the amount that they would have needed to put out the expense of creating 2 molds when they retooled those. This didn't happen for all the classic ones. The ones that did not receive 2 molds were basically just discontinued. So we can kind of see which figures were popular and which were not as popular at that time in the mid-90s. Now, here's where the pattern breaks a little bit, because 5 years after 1996 takes you up to, 2000, 2001, and we didn't see, as far as I can tell, there were no newly tooled classic Carnegie figures coming out at that time. Obviously we had the new versions, but the classic ones seem to have just continued to use those 1996 molds through the early 2000s. My guess for the reason that is because they had 2 molds. They basically had double the amount of time before they wore out. Obviously, demand for those older figures must have not been as high as maybe they expected, at least going into the early 2000s. So they weren't producing concurrent, 2 concurrent production runs with 2 different molds to meet demand anymore. They could kind of take a more leisurely pace, use mold A for one run, use mold B for another run. You can see I have documented evidence of these molds in continued use for some of these figures. So double that time brings you, yes, right up until 2007, when the line was refreshed again. This is when new paint applications were added. Interestingly, most of the 2007 refreshed line still used one or the other, but in very rare cases, both, of the 1996 molds. Shortly after that, around 2010 to 2012, we once again start seeing brand new molds, recreated molds for some of the classic figures, retaining those 2007 colors. So there you go. This is a big piece of the puzzle in terms of why we saw so much mold turnover, mold changes throughout the life of the Carnegie Collection. And, apply this as you like to other toy lines that have had similar longevity, although there are not too many of those. If you found this interesting, please go check out Spector Creative's channel, especially the toy tooling video. A lot of interesting information in there that we can apply not only to action figures, which is what he's mainly talking about, but also to animal figures and dinosaur toys and things like that. I will see you next time on Jurassic Plastic. Thanks for watching.